Ladies and gentlemen, the year is about to end. Before St. Nick drops his butt down our chimneys, let us take a look back on the games of the year, and maybe scramble to figure out a gift for that gamer that we just don't know how to buy for. What follows is my top 10 games of 2019. Asterix, top 10 of the games that I played. Here at Tarks Gauntlet, I am really only one man, and I can't possibly play every game that came out. So of course there are going to be notable exceptions to this list. Games that I simply can't include because I never played them. This year, the games I feel most unfortunate to have missed include Atelier Ryza, Crystar, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, A Plague Tale Innocence, AI The Somnium Files, Devil May Cry 5, which honestly I'm pretty sure deserves a spot here, and a ton of indie games like Katana Zero or Disco Elysium, and well, many more. I will also be excluding expansions and DLCs. If it can't be launched as a standalone product and requires a separate purchase for it to work, then it's not going to meet my criteria. This is, of course, my list, so if some inclusion seems strange to you, well, that's just because I'm a strange guy. But you probably all already know that. A few of these games I've covered on the channel already, and a few more I've hardly spoke about. But with all that out of the way, let's get into it. Starting off the list, we have the latest effort by From Software, Sekiro, not taking the 10th spot, in fact being beaten out by Code Vein. It's sacrilege, I know, but the more I look back, the more I find I've enjoyed my time with Code Vein even more. Both games offer a decent spin on the Soulsborne formula, and you really can't go wrong with either of them. But with some frame pacing issues, however, infrequently messing up combat in Sekiro, and so much backtracking and copy-paste bosses, I found Sekiro to be just a little comparatively underwhelming. Code Vein swoops in and swings its massive anime weapons at the competition, showing that From Software aren't the only dogs in the race. Some zones and bosses are hit or miss, and the difficulty is a bit on the easier side, but some rather solid combat and a great character customization and class system really takes things in a new direction. The class system in particular allows you to mess around with your build in ways few Soulsborne games do. So when new zones do pose a threat, you can always hunker down and find new ways to spec around your problems. As a result of this near immediate class change system, gameplay offers a hell of a lot of variety, and that variety is never more than a minute or two away. In other Soulsborne games, so much of your playthrough is spent pursuing a single build, so changing to something else is a massive roadblock. Code Vein slays this issue with grace. Anime Souls may not seem like much special on the surface, and in many ways it's really not trying to be, yet it still has enough unique content and ideas to ultimately stand apart from the competition and offer fresh and rewarding gameplay. It does all this in a genre that's running the risk of stagnating in the current gaming landscape. Also, it has stripper bosses. In the 9th position, we have Hideo Kojima's long-awaited Death Stranding, a game that's sure to top many top 10 lists of the year, and nearly just as many top 10 worsts of the year. Death Stranding is a divisive game to say the least, yet for many of us out there, we can't deny the allure of its siren song. Venturing across a wasteland America aiming to establish lines of communication from coast to coast, and working to uncover man's seemingly limitless potential when our forces are united, just strikes me as really compelling. Gameplay seems to largely be busy work at first, walking around, balancing freight and weight limitations, stamina, endurance, boot degradation, stress meters, and so on. But what Death Stranding does with these mechanics transforms what's arguably a boring yet beautiful landscape into one massive obstacle to be traversed. The challenge and conflict you face along the way is hidden in plain sight, impressively disguised behind a facade of mundanity. Using tools, structures, and sheer willpower, you'll trek one trudging step after the other across the desolation and restore humanity's willpower and faith in each other. Though many characters have tragic and twisted backstories as well as intriguing and depressing current lives, Death Stranding is an altruistic game all about lifting people up. And this isn't just about the player characters, but the players themselves. Everything is constructed around being cooperative and the rewards that come with just generally being a good person. It's hard to walk away from this game upon completing it and not feel like you've been uplifted. That is, if you can survive the tense as hell BT encounters without going into cardiac arrest. Yes, despite a later entry on the list, Death Stranding may have been the most tense and horrifying game I've played all year. In the 8th position, we have a game that's primed to take many people's #1 spots of the year, and that is Fire Emblem Three Houses. FE3H is a great evolution in the series and a wonderful re-entry into the home console market. At its launch, the difficulty options were limited, and so it seemed at least a bit to be easier and more accessible than previous Fire Emblem games. Though more difficulty options have since been added, giving more value to a pack that already more than earned the price of admission. Fire Emblem Three Houses comes complete with 4 different campaigns. Though a bunch of the content is similar between the early half of each, it's hard to deny just how radically different many of them turn out to be. Some staple mechanics like the weapon triangle have become less important than before, and the new additions to combat can aid players more than ever before, but what we have for a tactical RPG system remains one of the most engaging the genre has to offer. With Fire Emblem Three Houses, we also see a lot of inspiration from Persona and Trails of Cold Steel in the way of social and bonding events, adding new layers of depth to each and every character in this massive roster. This is a game that could have easily ranked higher for me. However, throughout the playthrough, there was a certain feel of cheapness that gradually rubbed me the wrong way. How some environments and character models were incredibly ugly and lackluster, and how some social events were as bare bones as possible, rarely ever adding new animations or props for the characters to work with. When reflecting on this game and knowing full well it was expected to sell millions, it strikes me as odd and disappointing that so much was left borderline unfinished, where later releasing games with much smaller budgets and far less sales expectations drastically exceeded them in this department. Still though, for the gameplay, characters, and story, Fire Emblem Three Houses easily deserves a play and a spot on this list, especially for those in desperate need of a console-level JRPG on the go. Also, Shamir for Waifu President 2020. In the number 7 position, we have Mario Maker 2. This is definitely an odd inclusion, as Mario Maker 2 isn't much of a game, and what you get out of it is dependent on what you put in. The game is as good as you make it, and as good as the levels you can find. I was a huge fan of the first installment, and in every category but 2, I would say this one is even better. The 2 outstanding areas it's worst is the lack of amiibo support and costumes, and the lack of a Wii U gamepad to intuitively edit levels on. Unfortunately, editing with a standard controller feels far less encouraging, but the new tools entirely change the realm of possibility, and with the updates it's received and updates it will receive, every single one is a complete game changer. The latest of which essentially transforming the game into a 2D Legend of Zelda dungeon editor. I've long loved level editors, and to this day there is no game I've spent more time in than the original StarCraft. That was, of course, because of its campaign editor. Mario Maker is a complete addiction for me, and something I always feel compelled to return to, create in, and just explore the creativity of others. There is a bunch of halfway decent single-player content this time around, but aside from using it to get new ideas for my own creations, it's just kind of a big meh to me. At the end of the day though, Mario Maker 2 is a game I will keep returning to until Mario Maker 3 releases. It is the gift that keeps on giving, and the creativity on display in this engine never fails to inspire me.
Pretty easy. Okay. Nope. I cannot fit through there. Come on, stop having so... Okay, I should be falling right now. What?
Coming in at number 6, we have Platinum Games' latest effort, Astral Chain. Astral Chain, maybe because I missed out on DMC 5, was hands down the most frenetic action game I played all year, and one of the most original takes on hack and slash action combat I've experienced in a long while. Introducing a unique kind of chain mechanic as well as familiars to combat alongside, Astral Chain had its work cut out for it in the playability department. One can't deny that something this unique, something this fast-paced and demanding, is cumbersome to learn how to adapt to. In a way, it feels like you'd need a third hand to control everything the game gives you. Given this though, they handled the difficult task of control mapping with grace. And when the game clicks, it clicks and it just feels awesome. The fast-paced action combined with some striking visuals and art design and a badass symphonic metal soundtrack made this a blast to just keep pumping through. Well, excluding Chapter 8 anyway. Though its storyline is anime as hell and rather shamelessly derivative in some areas, nothing could stop Astral Chain from being the roller coaster that it is. It truly is another solid hit from Platinum Games. Coming in at the middle of the list here, we have Zankey 0 Last Beginning. I said back when I reviewed it that I wouldn't be forgetting it, and I haven't. All these months later, certain chapters and themes from Zankey Zero Last Beginning still linger in the back of my head and recur to me from time to time. When witnessing something in another game I think is a little messed up, my mind always puts me back in check with a quick little, "Still not as messed up as Zankey Zero though." Zankey Zero Last Beginning is a post-apocalyptic first-person dungeon crawler with real-time combat, focused on a motley crew of misfits seemingly destined to a weird pattern of death and rebirth and rapid aging. These are the last remnants of mankind, and they're looking for any way to break the cycle and escape this weird island they all mysteriously awoke on. And maybe in the process of this, discover why this one particular character doesn't age like the rest of them do. Mechanically, Zankey Zero is just different. As your characters age while exploring dungeons, certain stats will change, such as their equip loads. When they get too old, they will just suddenly die, causing you to trek back to the central hub to see them revived. The game offers a lot of neat little gimmicks while exploring to make it stand out from other dungeon crawlers. And it's actually the second game on the list to have a piss mechanic. The first, of course, being Stranding. When you fail to allow your characters to relieve themselves, they may accidentally do it in their pants while adventuring, and this has a number of adverse effects, such as the enemy's heightened alertness to you. If quirks like that don't make you interested, I don't know what will. Maybe a reference to Danganronpa, as this is that team's first game since wrapping the franchise, and they showed beyond a shadow of a doubt that they are not just a one-trick pony. Zankey Zero has ways of just remaining fresh and making every moment feel different from the last. Even if you're just stuck exploring a single dungeon for an hour, the aging mechanic alone will constantly give you something to keep your attention set on. Zankey Zero, mostly because of its dark humor and its incredibly well-written character arcs, just stuck with me like few games ever have, and for that alone, it earns a spot on my list. At number 4, we have Control. Alan Wake, though a bit tedious and repetitive in its gameplay, has long been a favorite game of mine, and so I was watching Remedy's new game Control with a very close eye. At its launch, it was plagued with some performance issues, so I sat it on my shelf and only got to it this past November. But what I played, I loved. Quite a bit of it, however, is quite a bit beyond description, as it is quite a little piece of art. We find ourselves inside a large corporate-like building where paranormal research is constantly ongoing. In a way, this building works a little bit like the house in the movie 13 Ghosts, only instead of powerful and dangerous ghosts being locked up in the basement, we have locked up seemingly innocuous artifacts capable of granting its users insane abilities, or even transforming the entire world around them into a dangerous, near uninhabitable zone. With a limited arsenal of guns but an expansive set of special abilities such as levitation and what pretty much boils down to force, grab, and throw, we battle our way through this building in the midst of an almost demon-like invasion in search of our brother who many years back was taken captive by the company. The story plays out in a very Lynchian manner. So much of it is left up to interpretation and conveyed to the player through irregular means. Mundane things hold large secrets to the overall plot, and accessing or understanding these secrets does not come without some level of personal exploration. The art design, especially in the environment, is absolutely incredible, channeling the odd architecture of a Beksinski piece or even an M.C. Escher painting crossed with a Lovecraftian nightmare. I do have some hang-ups with the game, the biggest of which being that the end was just a bit of a sequel-baiting letdown, not even containing much of a true final boss, but while it does suck to cap off an adventure that way, the journey was worth every step I took, and I really look forward to seeing how this gets wrapped up later down the line. In the third position, we have the remake to define all remakes. Resident Evil 2 is a near-perfect game. Everything it sets out to do, it does with incredible execution, fully realizing its ideas and seeing them through to fruition in the strongest way possible. Resi 2 Remake contains all 4 campaigns from the original while adding some new content into the mix. Mechanics that used to be seen as tedious rather than being removed have been made optional, so that those in search of a more traditional survival horror adventure can find it in the truest sense of the term. Many new mechanics have been introduced but do seemingly nothing to impede on the feeling of the original, and sections of the game that used to be a little lackluster have been made more eventful. The visuals are among the best seen on the system so far, and one of the best from Capcom overall. If I had any complaints at all, I do wish we had a better way to shake off enemies when getting caught that doesn't result in taking damage, and I wish enemies didn't quite take as many shots to the head to take down. After a while, that just felt tedious to me, and I would easily take less ammo in favor of shooting less along the way. But that is honestly the extent of my complaints. It's hard to believe just how solid this game really was. There's rarely a dull moment and nothing along the way to take you out of this classic creep fest. There's not much to say here that would be of any use, because most of you already know what Resident Evil 2 is, and this is just Resident Evil 2, but arguably better. One of the most iconic zombie games in the most iconic survival horror franchise just got better. Alright, I'm pretty sure he doesn't see me. Shit. In the number 2 spot, we have RGG's Yakuza spin-off, Judgment. Judgment brought us once again to the world of Kamurocho, only this time in the shoes of lawyer-turned-detective Yagami. Running his own private detective agency, a new case comes across Yagami's desk, and this could be the case that makes or breaks his career. But with this case, new questions arise concerning Yagami's past, and an old trial from his days as a lawyer. What follows is a sense of inner conflict rarely seen in media, and the execution on his turmoil is sold extremely well. The case he's involved himself in becomes way bigger than one could possibly imagine, and threatens major political shifts if the truth is to come to light. Judgment does an excellent job of stringing you along from one thrilling moment to the next. Even when you think you know what's gonna happen, Judgment feeds new elements into the plot to make you doubt everything you thought you knew. Of course, where this is an RGG game, the beat-em-up combat is fun as hell with some amazing and visceral takedowns that, well, yes, many are carried over from previous Yakuza games, they are still awesome. The side content on offer isn't as wide in breadth as say Yakuza 0 or the Kiwami games, but there's far more than enough to justify the price of admission for one of the year's greatest games. If I had any complaints here at all, it would just be the trailing missions. The detection is a little finicky and the missions are just a little bit too long for how little actually happens. It gives you a fun look at what detective work might actually be like, but doing it just once or twice would have been enough. That aside, it's an absolutely incredible game with great writing, crushing drama, outrageous gags, fun combat, killer music, and a narrative that's tighter than a virgin on prom night. Now, before we get to the predictable number 1, I got a couple honorable mentions. I stated earlier that Sekiro just didn't make the cut for me, but it is still an incredible game and worth the play. Despite a few frustrations, it was one of the better games I played this year, and easily one of the most rewarding on its gameplay front. It might not make my top 10, but I don't think it was a bad call for the Game Awards to give it Game of the Year either. I'd also like to throw a nod towards Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, but full disclosure, I also backed this game on Kickstarter when I had about 300 subscribers. Though an ugly game and a bit of a technical mess with some font issues, inconsistent frame rates, and the occasional crash, Bloodstained was still a hell of a lot of fun. It really scratched an itch for me. The further you get into this Metroidvania Return to Form 2, the better it gets. The sense of power you feel as you unlock new abilities and how it transforms your ability to traverse the environment really makes for an engaging play. But that's all I'm really gonna say on it. I actually only just finished the game last week. No plans for an actual review, but I will say I do recommend it. Give it a look if you're the least bit curious. Now, in my number 1 position, we of course have Trails of Cold Steel 3. Continuing the Cold Steel saga, we switch to a new cast headed by our old protagonist, Reen Schwarzer. The narrative is weaved and paced about as well as it's ever been, making for an adventure that just ticks along from one dramatic show-stopping reveal to the next. Combat is expanded, refined, and better balanced than the 2 previous Cold Steel games, and while still exploitable in a fun way, no characters are outright broken through normal means of progression. Visuals are at what's possibly an all-time high for Falcom, having made the jump to being a dedicated console game. And of course, the narrative reward for ongoing fans of the franchise is unparalleled. Every dive into the series is strengthened by your dedication to the series, and as a result we have what's become one of the greatest and most rewarding video game universes to be a part of. The story, of course, does not get resolved here as there is still a 4th game in the franchise awaiting localization. However, what they built up has set a very high bar for the series, and I can't wait to see how any of it gets resolved going forward. That is, if any of it gets resolved. If you guys want a full review of this game, I do have one on my channel. Now, unless something miraculous or drastic happens, any year that a Legend of Heroes game releases, you can probably expect to see me hail it as the best game of the year. And unless you've sank into the series yourself, it'd be hard to make anybody understand why I feel that way. But the fans know, and the fans get it. But that is my top 10 games of 2019. Asterisks of the games that I played. Of the games you guys have played, let me know in the comments what your top 10s are, or what you think I should have played and included this past year. If you guys like the video, you know the deal. Like, comment, subscribe, and share the video if you can. Links to my socials are in the description below, and as always folks, thanks for watching.